Hello and welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Andrea Renee Knits, and this is a little weekly podcast where I try my best to answer some of your questions. Today I am doing something I've never done before. I'm wearing a pattern that hasn't been released. If you know me, you know I don't even usually wear my patterns like in my private life until they're out in the world, but True to my nature, I've knit two of these, and I thought, it's coming out in just a few days. So I'm going to wear one today, and then you'll get to see the other one next week. You'll see them both on Tuesday when I release them. But anyways, I just had to. So I am so excited. This is the Frame Your Face cowl. And if you could not tell, it is based on the framed sweater for Rhinebeck this year. This would be a great option to knit if you're like, girl, I can't get a sweater done by October. It takes me a year to knit a sweater kind of person. Maybe you're not a sweater knitter. This would be a great option. And you can still come join us over on the hill at Rhinebeck. We would love to have you. So this is coming out Tuesday. If you like to be the first to know, sign up for my newsletter. There's a link right below in the show notes. It's also the only way to get the introductory discount that goes exclusively to my newsletter subscribers. So this would be a good time to sign up. And this one is knit up in Ritual Dyes Sprite in Natural and Obsidian. I'm pretty sure of the colorway names. So I have been I'm just in this like black and white high contrast phase. I have another pattern, which hopefully we'll talk about that on another day. That'll be coming out also in kind of similar colors. But anyways, this is late. It is already noon on Friday. I usually have this video out already by this time on a Friday. It usually comes out Friday morning, but we just got back from our big family trip back to Michigan to see family, new baby niece. My husband actually played a show, which was so fun. He got to play with his bandmate Brian, so they go by Western and Maori, and they haven't played since we moved to Maine. So it was so fun to go and see them live after 6 years. It was really fun for my kids to be able to see their papa play on stage. We played at a beautiful lavender farm in northern Michigan, so that was so much fun. But we got home at midnight, and it's been a wild goose chase to get my head back on straight, get the house back in order, unpack. It's kind of the final push of summer before kids go back to school here. So anyways, here I am. It's Friday. I have coffee, and we're gonna do an afternoon Q&A instead of the usual morning. But we have some fun questions. I'm gonna go ahead and dive right in. This is question number 1. I was hoping to chat about the Tubular Caston. I love how it looks, and I've definitely become more confident with the technique, but for some reason, I struggle with counting stitches with this cast on. I'm always plus or minus 2 or so stitches, even with putting stitch markers every 10 stitches. I cast on about 5 times when I made my second tessellated vest. I took the advice of folks in either the framed chat or comments from the frame testers and tried the tubular cast on that starts with the provisional cast on, hoping that it would help. As I squeezed my knitting time in where I have 5 minutes, I thought maybe having to shove my knitting back in the bag contributed to my counting problems, and the provisional cast on would be sturdier. Spoiler, I was still off on the final count. Any other tips or tricks you can recommend, or is making an adjustment of a couple of stitches in that first round after the ribbing an okay option? Okay. That was, Are we ready? We're ready. We're ready to answer this question. I'm going to gather my thoughts now. So, a few different things in here. Of course, if it is a stitch or two, no one will ever know but you. ever, go ahead and just fudge in a couple little increases. That is what I was reading. That's, for some reason, I just decided to finish reading it in my head instead of out loud, because that's the kind of day we're gonna have today. And that is what they did on one of their last knits, is they just went ahead and did a make one on either side of their framed sweater to get to the right stitch count. And I would just say, absolutely, you do you. No one else will ever know. Stitch markers are a great option. I have done that before, especially sometimes you don't know how many stitches you have to cast on. Sometimes for a sweater, it can be hundreds of stitches, and that is a lot to keep track of. I will also say having a hard time counting your stitches with a tubular cast on is not a you problem. That's a cast on. That one is really tricky. It is a cheeky little cast on. It's really tricky to count stitches with that cast on, because it is one of the reasons why it's flexible is it's kind of loosey-goosey and it'll rotate around your needle, and it is just the nature of that cast on. So you're not alone there. What I do, and maybe you'll find this trick helpful, is I use a row counter. So if you've been around here for a while, you've probably heard me tout my love of row counters, because I tend to be a worrier. I'm going to see if I have any in this pouch. I tend to be a worrier. I don't trust myself. And sometimes life is chaotic. And so you're at knit night, you're having a conversation, you're not always paying attention to what row you're on. So I love having a little row counter that I can just click to help me keep track. It just sets my mind at ease. I do not have one in this pouch. But there are a bunch out there. I have used one from Clover before. It's red. It looks like a box. It's like a little, my mom used to have something that looked really similar for counting while going grocery shopping, like keeping track of your grocery bill. That's what it's always reminded me of. It's probably why I like it. But it also has a really good clunk. So for me, the reason I like a clicky one is because hearing that noise helps me know that I remember to click it. So Clover has a good one. I also love, the main one I use these days is the Coco Knits one. It's a little circle. The reason I love that one, probably more than the Clover a little bit, is because it locks. So I have definitely had one of the red ones in my knitting bag and set my bag down and heard it click, and then I feel like I can't trust what it says. So I like one that you can lock, so you know if it's in your bag, it is going to stay at the correct count. I have so many little Notion pouches all over my desk, so now I'm checking them all to be like, usually I have row counters kind of everywhere. I like to keep one in each of my little knitting bags so that I always have one when I need them, except for right now. Okay, so the way that I would use that is kind of similar to the stitch markers. The reason, and again, I've done the stitch marker method. The reason I prefer the row counter is because, again, with this kind of loosey-goosey tubular cast on, depending on what weight yarn you're using, having a bunch of stitch markers in there it almost throws me out of the cast on, because you have to have your hands arranged a certain way. So for some people, it'll just be a little too clunky to have to slip one on all the time. If you are consistently having those few stitches off, I would even employ both methods. So I would do stitch markers. One thing I would be curious about, oh, you said every 10 stitches. And that's what I would do. I would do every 10 stitches. But otherwise, I just use a row counter and I click it every 10 stitches. And it's really easy for me to not mess up how I'm manipulating everything and just quickly and keep going. But that is what I like to do. So, and I would save my cast on. So that was one thing you said too. You're like, I squeeze in my knitting where I have 5 minutes. I would try to do my total cast on, including at least one setup row, if not both, in a block of time where you have time to finish it. Tubular cast on isn't really one you can set down and pick back up. It is just not stable enough. So I would definitely wait until you have a good block of time and you can cast on, and then do at least one setup row, because that's going to help stabilize it. Both setup rows would be even better. That way you know when you return to it, you're going to go right into your ribbing. But yeah, so you're already doing one of the things I would do. The other one is using a row counter and just clicking it every 10 stitches so you can be a little bit more certain about your cast on. Also, make sure, sometimes where I mess up is for some reason, because that first stitch is just our little, you might use a slip knot, you might just do the little loop-de trick. But it's really easy to not count that first stitch. So that might be somewhere I always have to check myself on my first 10, because a lot of times I forget to do that first one because it's not the same motion. Like you have to get one stitch on there before you can start the rest of the tubular cast on. So make sure that you're including that one. That one might be one of the ones that's getting you. I also wonder too if anything else could be going on with your tubular cast on. Sometimes when it rotates around our needle, it can wrap around the wrong way and almost undo one of our stitches. So if that happened, that could be affecting your stitch count and making you lose a stitch or two. If you ever notice kind of a weird gap in your tubular cast on, that's probably what happened. So a lot of people like doing the tubular cast on onto straight needles and then transferring to their circular because it's more stable and it's way easier to keep control of that tubular cast on. So that's an option too. And it would also be easier to count your stitches on there. Again, it's just more stable. You don't have this little cord that they start twirling around. So that actually might be really helpful for you, is to consider getting a pair of straight needles to cast onto. All right, let's go on to question number 2. Ooh. So this is a big one that a lot of us live in fear of. Do you have recommendations about how to protect your knitwear and yarn from pests like moths? For the last year or two, I've had issues with moths in our home, and it is so disappointing to find little, or sometimes big, holes in something I so lovingly made. I've done some Googling and do my best to follow the tips I've read, but I'm curious if you've got any additional recommendations. It's a frustrating problem to feel like I can't actually solve. It is. I think that's one of the reasons why we fear it so much, is because once you have moths, getting rid of them can be pretty hard. So here, I'll just share some of the things I do, and I'm sure other people have advice they'll throw below. I will say what works for one person doesn't always work for someone else. There are definitely a lot of ideas out there on what to do. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So things that I do myself. Number 1, never store a dirty sweater. Never put a sweater back into your closet or into storage that you have worn. Even if you don't feel like it's dirty, just wearing it sheds skin cells and probably has some perspiration. Even if you don't feel like it does, it probably does. And that is the main thing that is actually attracting those moths, is that part of it, the protein that comes off of our body onto that sweater. So always wash your sweaters before storing them. Moths and other wool-eating critters love dark places. So during sweater season, I'm not going to wash a sweater between every single wear because I wear them so much. So what I recommend doing is keeping them out in a well-lit area and keep them moving. So again, even with our yarn stash, don't just go put it in a dark area and leave it for months at a time. Rotate your yarn around where you store it, move things around, get in and out of there, disturb it. Don't just leave something sitting, especially in the dark. So wash your sweaters before storage, especially long storage. Get things moving around. A lot of people will 1 to 4 times a year bring their stuff out on a super sunny day, spread it and lay it all out. That can help things. I do some of the, don't know if it works, but I'm going to do it anyways, where I will tuck either a fabric sheet or a lavender sachet or something like smelly like that, perfumey, because they don't tend to like that. So I tuck that in everywhere. I put everything into Ziploc bags. So a lot of people ship yarn or fiber that you've ordered. A lot of times it comes in a zip top bag. So I always save those and reuse them. I store everything in its own bag and then inside a bin. And I have talked to pest people and they say that is great. You definitely want to do that. One of the reasons I do that is because I feel like if something gets in, I want to try to control it to one small place of impact instead of having all of my yarn just loose in a bin. Like you can see my bins here. I do not have loose yarn in those. They are all separated into bags. I usually put like 8 skeins in a bag, whatever fits, whatever size bag you have, because I would rather lose 8 skeins to a moth infestation situation than 100 skeins. Or one sweater to my whole collection. If you do find something, I think that there are certain things you can do. One is to immediately get rid of that item that you found issues with, because there's a good chance there's eggs and other things in that sweater, and you don't want it to get worse. You don't want it to go to your other sweaters, your other clothing, your other yarn, etc. So one option is to get rid of it. Another is to immediately get it in your freezer, put it in your freezer for a couple days, pull it out, let it thaw, put it back in your freezer for a couple more days. I've personally heard that you want to do it a few times because that will hit the different life cycles that might be occurring in said garment or yarn or fiber. What else do I do? Oh, I actually found a green pest solution service here that deals with moths, and that is a quarterly service. I wish I had known about it before because I do have a lot of fear around moths. I'm like, knock on all the wood. As this is my job, I have a very large collection of knitwear. I have a lot of yarn, I have a lot of fiber, and I live in fear of those little critters getting in here. So I finally found out that, I can have a service come out and they spray for things like that. And it's a green service, so I feel pretty comfortable using them. So that is an option too that I've never heard anyone else talk about. And I wish I had known because it's definitely helping my stress level of the fear of keeping this stuff that I have so lovingly made safe. But I've also heard black pepper can help, having black pepper around. I guess that's all the ones off the top of my head, but definitely moving things around, exposing it to light, all those good things. You can definitely find lots of forums. The hard thing is once you Google it, it'll probably scare you more. Like there are a lot of catastrophizers around moths online, so just be careful with Googling. It's like Googling a medical condition where all of a sudden it can really throw you into a tailspin because people are like, everything's ruined if you ever see a moth, like it's all, burn it down. So anyways, but feel free to throw any of your tips down below and let us know if you have anything that you feel like has worked. Maybe you've dealt with an infestation. What did you do? We would love to know. But let's try and keep it positive so we don't stress people out. Okay. Next question is a spinning question. I've used my drop spindle and I've spun clockwise 4 ounces of merino, which I want to apply together. They are on 2 separate bobbins because I transferred them in order to continue spinning on that same drop spindle. I am wondering if when I apply them, I should apply them clockwise, even though I spun them clockwise because I moved them to different bobbins, therefore reversing the twist perhaps? I'm not sure. Okay, so I also tried applying from inner and outer from I'm guessing a center pole ball, and that was a total mess. I applied them counterclockwise. Okay, so basically, no, you still need to spin them counterclockwise. If we have anybody here who's not a spinner or is a new spinner, what happens when we spin applied yarn is we need to spin our singles going one direction. A lot of us just default to spinning our singles clockwise. Well, when we go to apply them, if we also applied them clockwise, they would be so overspun, they would just be these little pigtail coils everywhere. So to balance that yarn, so it's not over twisted in one direction, we then ply them going in the opposite direction, counterclockwise. It does not change your twist on your yarn by transferring it to a bobbin. To change your twist, it would have had to unspin them and respin them the other way. So even if you transfer to a bobbin, you definitely want to make sure that you still spin in the opposite direction that you spun your plies. I'm wondering if what happened when you did the center pole ball and tried to ply from the inside and outside of that. What happens is as you're plying from that, the outer strand, we'll say, is rotating around the inner one as you're going. So every once in a while you have to, I wish I could show a demo of this. What I feel like I have to do at least is kind of release a little bit. Oh, I'm making it so confusing. It's not something I can just use words to describe. I think plying from bobbins, the way you're talking about, is going to be easier than doing it from the center pole ball, because there's this weird little twisty thing that happens that you kind of have to let go, like get your finger out of the way. When I ply from a center pole ball, I keep my finger in between my outer and inner strand, but because that outside one is going around the middle one as it feeds off, every once in a while I have to lift my finger and get it out of the way and then put it back in. But unless you've experienced it, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. Or maybe that's a me thing. I don't know. So anyways, I think you're going to have probably a little bit of an easier time going off the bobbins, but still ply them counterclockwise. Question number 4 is about picking up stitches for sleeves in a sweater or cardigan. I have answered this in the past, but I think it's just one that bears repeating because I get this question every single week. So it is something that anyone who's knit a sweater has probably dealt with this, and so we're going to cover it again. I always have a hole in the underarm where the stitches got stretched. Is there a technique I can use to avoid that, or is it just something I have to fix afterward? So the easiest way to avoid it is to pick up 2 to 4 extra stitches in your underarm when you do your pickup for your sleeve. Then the place to do that is at the corners. So generally speaking, if we're doing like top down and we cast on these stitches right here, it's just natural that as our stitches are held for our sleeve, these areas just stretch out. It yanks on the yarn in a certain way that starts to expand it. And so a lot of us deal with where it's a little stretched out and it can look like a little hole on either side. So what you can do is simply just pick up a few extra stitches at each corner. And then as you start to knit your sleeve, you can immediately knit them together and decrease them right out. And you won't even be able to notice it, but it will help just fill it in so that you aren't ending up with holes on either side. The other option, let's say you are doing all over patterning and you really can't have those extra stitches. It's going to confuse you, it's going to mess you up, so you don't want to do that option. When I go to pick up underarm sleeve stitches, even if I am picking up extras, I always leave a nice long tail of yarn when I go to start picking up my stitches to go around the sleeve hole. And that way I do have that yarn to fix it after the fact. And I just find that I can always do it to the degree I want it, tidying up and kind of reinforcing that area. That can also be a high friction area. And I just don't mind doing that. I always have that tail there and I tidy it right up depending on the sweater, the gauge, what's going on. Some sweaters it's worse than others and how much that yarn might stretch out. I also think that there are other things you can do to avoid some of that stretching. For instance, I always used to put my sleeves, my held stitches on a spare needle. I find that the spare needles want to pop open more and that stretches my corners more. So one thing you can do is you can actually knit a row or 2 down the sleeve right when you're separating. Just knit those stitches back and forth for a couple rows and then bind off with waste yarn, and that doesn't stretch it out as much. So then when you go back, just go ahead, undo that bind off. You with that waste yarn, it's really easy to see. You undo it, you can undo the row or 2 that you knit, and that's just to help stabilize it. And now you're working with these stitches that aren't all stretched out from being on a needle that maybe kind of was popping them open a little bit. So that's a method I like to do too. And otherwise, if I don't do that, I always use waste yarn or barber's cords and throw my stitches on there, and then I try to tie that in a bow so that it's kind of holding it closed. But I do find that even with that still, those corners tend to get stretched out. Just from the gravity of the weight of the rest of the sweater as you're working it. It's just kind of what happens. You can also go in there with a tapestry needle and kind of zhuzh that yarn and tighten it up a little bit around that area and spread it out a little bit more so that all that yarn that got kind of pulled from the weight of everything goes back into place. Some of it's also fixed with blocking, but my favorite way to fix it up is picking up extra stitches in the corners and then decreasing them out and tidying them up using that extra yarn I attach when picking up sleeve stitches, a little duplicate stitch on the inside, and it really tidies it up nicely. All right, last question is kind of a fun one, and I haven't done a question like this in a long time. So, do you ever see yourself designing home goods like blankets or pillow covers? Every once in a while I do think about it. I feel like just because I'll think of something I want for my home. I think this would be so fun to do as a pillow cover. So maybe I will. Maybe I will. But in general, I think I love to wear my knitting, and so I don't think about it as much, but maybe you've sparked something. All right. Okay, I'm gonna end this here. You can probably see it on my face. I'm still a little tired. Sometimes the coffee just doesn't do enough. But I am so grateful to you for spending a little time with me today, or maybe you're watching this on Saturday since it's coming out a little bit late. But I hope to see you here next week. Don't forget that if you want to have first crack at getting this new cowl, sign up for the newsletter. This pattern will be live on Tuesday, and next Friday I'll be showing you my other version. So have a great day, a great weekend, and I hope to see you back next week. Bye.